I thought I knew my boss. I thought I knew myself. But in a quiet Chicago hotel room after a stormy day of meetings, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen, tired and tender, like a man who had finally taken off a mask. The question he asked me next wasn't what you think, but it reached deeper than any compliment, deeper than any promotion. It forced me to choose between the easy story I tell about myself and the truer one I keep hidden. What happened that night changed the way I carry my age, my work, my heart, and it all started with the simplest request. Before I dive in, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love knowing where stories travel. I'm Dibra, 51, and this is what happened to me on a rainy Thursday that smelled like coffee and cold air and something new. The conference had run late. Chicago in early spring can be theatrical about its weather. The wind throws its weight around the corners of the buildings, and the sky switches costumes 5 times an hour. We wrapped the final panel after 7, and by the time I collected my notes, my phone, and the little stress chocolate I always keep in my purse, the rain was combing the streetlights into gold threads. Our team scattered toward taxis and the clatter of dinner reservations. I wanted nothing more than to sink into my bed, call my sister, and laugh about how I had accidentally waved my clicker like a conductor between slides 3 and 4. That my boss, Frank, found me near the elevator and asked if we could look over tomorrow's pitch one more time. He wasn't demanding. Normally he's the sort who wears decisiveness like a well-cut suit. The man can sign a contract with a pen that never scratches, make a room hush without raising his voice. But that night his shoulders were notched a little lower, and there was a politeness in his eyes I recognized from long ago, the kind you use when you're asking for help you're not sure you deserve. The hotel lobby hummed with the gentle bustle of people pretending they weren't tired. The elevator exhaled us onto the 10th floor. My room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner, and the paper flowers tucked into the welcome card. The carpet had that geometric hotel pattern that suggests order but never quite achieves it. I kicked off my heels, tucked them by the door, and made 2 cups of the good tea I keep in my suitcase. He took his mug with both hands, like heat itself could steady him. We started with slides. It's funny how safe it can feel to talk about bullet points, like hiding behind a tidy wall of ideas. He asked for my notes. I gave them. We shifted phrasing, swapped examples, trimmed an anecdote. The thunder drummed somewhere far off, as if the sky were reminding us it was still there, doing its weather mood thing. After a while, our conversation wandered, the way good conversations do. We talked about clients who change their minds and how you can lose a week chasing the wrong problem. We talked about the time I brought my son, Kevin, to take your kid to work day, and he asked why adult chairs always looked so serious. Somewhere between laughter and quiet, I noticed it. The expression. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody would have put a score under it. But something in him softened, like a knot being worked loose. His jaw unclenched. The little furrow he keeps between his eyes, his "we have premiums and deadlines" furrow, faded. He set his mug down and looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time in color. "Deborah," he said, and then he stopped. He pressed his lips together, the way you do when you're about to say the real thing or nothing at all. "Frank?" I kept my voice easy, as if we were still just talking about slide 8. "This is going to sound strange," he said. "May I ask for something unusual? And if you don't want to, please say no." I could feel my heartbeat step forward, curious and cautious at once. "Ask," I said. "I haven't had a calm minute in months," he said. "Not a performative calm, the kind you put on for a meeting, but the kind where you can hear yourself think. Would you sit with me for 1 minute and just breathe? No talking, no work, just quiet." and if that feels uncomfortable, tell me." He said it like a person reaching out across icy water, certain it will crack. He was careful, asking, not assuming. The word yes rose in me before I had time to dress it up. I nodded, and we sat side by side on the little hotel sofa, not touching, feet planted, knees angled slightly toward each other like umbrellas propped in a corner. I set my phone timer for 60 seconds. It's funny how long a minute can be when you're paying attention. At first I could hear the air conditioner's soft rattle, the rain murmuring against the window, the far-off elevator bell. Then I noticed the sound of our 2 breaths, different tempos weaving into a single rhythm. My shoulders dropped. There are times in life when you realize you've been holding yourself up like a tent for years, and that no one had asked you to rest the poles down for a second. That room, its beige walls, its forgettable art, the glow of the city tapering through the curtains, became a small chapel. When the timer chimed, I didn't want to move, and neither did he. He didn't reach for me. He didn't fill the air with apology or explanation. He just looked at me with that same expression, tired, yes, but grateful. I was surprised by the warmth that spread through me, a kindness I hadn't thought to expect from this man who mostly lived in emails and yes/no decisions. He spoke first. "My wife used to do that with me," he said softly. "When we were stuck. When I was angry. When she'd say, 'Sit. Breathe. We're not enemies. She passed 3 years ago. I tell people I'm fine. Sometimes I am." He swallowed. He wasn't auditioning for sympathy, and I wasn't interviewing him for trauma. It was just the truth, given simply, like a cup of water. I thought of the way grief is both heavy and oddly polite, how it waits by the door until you invite it in. I thought of the rituals we invent to keep ordinary days from dissolving. The tea I carry, the call to my sister, the walks I take around my block at twilight. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't know." I let the words take up space between us, not as a bandage, but as a hand offered, palm up. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded. I almost didn't. I didn't want to make this room into something it's not. "What do you want it to be?" I asked, and the question surprised me. I felt my age in the best way. Old enough to ask for clarity. Old enough not to pretend I didn't care what he meant. "A room where we're people first," he said. "Where I can tell you that today, during your presentation, when the tech glitched and you laughed and kept going, I felt proud. Not as your boss. As a witness to someone refusing to let a hiccup break the song. The compliment landed in me like a small bright coin into a quiet fountain. I thought about how long it had been since someone spoke to me without rushing past the part where I'm still learning how to be at ease in my own skin. 51 is a good age. It fits like a well-worn jacket. But it also asks you to choose, every day, what kind of woman you're going to be. Invisible or vivid, tired or tender, guarded or present. The rain softened. Traffic hissed distant. I realized I was holding my mug like it was part of a ceremony. I set it down and looked at him. "Frank," I said, "may I ask you something unusual?" His mouth tipped at one corner. "Yes, and if I don't want to answer, I'll tell you." "Would you like to rehearse tomorrow's opening line with me?" I said, as if I were the room, not the client. The room. The people who came in with their own worries. The ones who will decide before you speak whether your voice is one they can trust. He exhaled, almost a laugh. "You always do this," he said. "You make the idea bigger and the fear smaller." "Yes, please." So we practiced, not with bullet points, but with tone. He stood, then sat back down, then stood again. He found his hands, his pace, his breath. He tried an opening that sounded like a headline. I shook my head. He tried another that sounded like a confession. Better. He tried one that began with a question. What problem wakes you up at 3 a.m., and how can we make sure it doesn't have the house to itself? I smiled and gave him a small nod. There. Yes, that one. Again, I said, and he did, until his voice settled into its own bones. Each attempt sanded a little more of the fear away. He slipped, he recovered. We laughed. Somewhere in the practice, I felt that wordless thread between us tighten, not romantic in the way movies are, but tender in the way people are when they choose gentleness over armor. He stopped and looked at me. That expression again, and something else. Permission asking to become gratitude. Deborah, he said quietly, may I ask for one more thing? Absolutely fine, if not. I heard the care in his phrasing. How often do we get asked like that, with that much room to decline? Ask, I said. Would you? May I hold your hand for a moment, he said, just to feel steady. Nothing more. I want to remember how safety feels when I have to be brave tomorrow. If you told me an hour earlier that my boss would ask to hold my hand in my hotel room, I would have rolled my eyes. But everything about the moment was clean, humble, almost old-fashioned in its courtesy. The request wasn't wrapped in suggestion or implication. It was exactly what it was. I could have said no. I would have if something inside me had tightened. Instead, I paid attention to my breath, to my boundaries, to the way I had learned over years to trust myself. Yes, I said, for a moment. We sat again, our shoulders still not touching. His hand was warm, and to my surprise, a little shaky at first. Mine has the soft maps of a life lived, faint lines from gardening, a small pale crescent scar from a teenage cooking mishap. We didn't lace our fingers. We let them rest side by side, like 2 pages in an open book. The room didn't tilt into anything inappropriate. It steadied as if it had been waiting for us to treat it as a place for mercy. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Long enough for my heart to slow. Long enough for me to remember the first time I felt seen at work. It was a decade ago, presenting a plan I had stayed up all night to fix after someone else forgot their piece. Long enough for him to say, barely above a whisper, that he had been afraid he'd forgotten how to be gentle. You haven't, I said. You just needed practice. We all do. He let go first, which I appreciated. He stood and rolled his shoulders, as if setting them back where they belonged. He thanked me in a voice that sounded like gratitude lived in a small house and paid its rent on time. Tomorrow, he said, smiling, let's both wear our comfiest shoes. It's going to be a long day. I'll bring the good tea, I said. And the clicker. I'm conducting us through that deck if it kills me. We gathered our things. He walked to the door and then turned, hand on the handle. Deborah, he said, about tonight. May I say how I'll remember it? You may, I said. As 2 grown-ups who chose kindness, he said. Nothing more, nothing less. I nodded. The words fit. He left, and the room took a breath of its own. I sat a while with the quiet, listening to the radiator tick, to the rain lose interest, to the city shrug into later hours. I washed my mug and set it upside down on the napkin like a tiny tent. I texted my sister that Chicago rain was behaving like a poet again, and that I was okay. Better than okay. When I finally slipped under the crisp hotel sheets, the pillow smelled faintly of starch and lavender. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the versions of myself I have been. Young and hungry, tired and afraid, brave and laughing anyway. I thought about how people are full of secret rooms, And sometimes, if you are lucky, if you are careful, you get invited into one. You sit there quietly. You don't rearrange the furniture. You leave a note that says, "Thank you for letting me visit." At 5:42 the next morning, I woke with the kind of clear head that feels like a gift. I brewed another cup of tea, stood by the window, and watched the early light stroke the lake. When I opened my door to pick up the newspaper the hotel still insists on delivering, I found a plain envelope resting on the carpet. No name. No hotel stationery. Just an envelope with the edges soft from being handled too long. I looked up and down the hallway. It was empty, silent except for the soft whir of the ice machine somewhere around the corner. I took the envelope inside, set it on the desk, and hesitated. Then I slid the card free and read the first line, and my day tilted, not toward scandal, not toward drama, but toward something I hadn't expected. A kind of courage I thought I'd left behind years ago. When I woke the next morning, the envelope on the desk was still waiting for me. The edges were soft from being carried around, and that alone told me more than I expected. Whoever left it, Frank, of course, had held it too long before finding the courage to slide it under my door. I made myself wait. I brewed my tea, showered, dressed in the suit that always makes me feel just a little taller, and only then sat down at the desk. The room was painted in morning gray, the kind of light that makes everything look honest. I opened the envelope with careful fingers. Inside was a simple folded card. The handwriting surprised me. Neat, steady, almost old-fashioned. It read, "Thank you for last night. For giving me a moment of stillness I didn't know I needed. You reminded me I'm still capable of being human, not just a role. No matter what today brings, I will carry that with me." I must have read it 4 times. It wasn't a love note. It wasn't a hidden confession. It was gratitude written in black ink, straight lines that carried weight far beyond their words. I tucked it back into the envelope and slipped it into the side pocket of my bag. Something in me knew I would keep it for years. At breakfast, the conference dining hall buzzed with suits, laptops, and clinking cutlery. Frank arrived later than most, hair damp from the shower, tie askew. He caught my eye across the room, and for a second it felt like we were sharing a secret no one else could read. But instead of approaching me directly, he nodded once and sat with a client. Professional. Appropriate. And yet, the nod was enough. Later that morning, we walked into the grand ballroom for the pitch. The ceiling chandeliers threw light across tables, and the air smelled of brewed coffee and ambition. Frank stood at the front, his papers stacked, his laptop connected. I sat off to the side, ready with my notes and that infamous clicker. When he began, I watched not just his words, but his presence. He didn't rush. He didn't armor himself with empty confidence. He breathed. He found the rhythm we had practiced. And when he asked the room that question, "What problem wakes you up at 3 a.m., and how can we make sure it doesn't have the house to itself?" I saw heads lift, eyebrows rise. He had them. Half an hour later, as applause rolled politely around the room, I felt a warmth spread through me. Not pride in myself, not exactly, but a recognition that sometimes the smallest kindness can tip a whole day toward better outcomes. When we left the stage, he touched my elbow lightly, almost formally, and whispered, "That one was for you." The day became a blur of handshakes, business cards, and future plans. We secured not just interest but commitment. My colleagues were flushed with victory, already talking about dinner celebrations. By evening, the city had shaken off its storm, and the air outside was crisp with a promise of spring. Back at the hotel, I found Frank waiting in the lobby. He wasn't smiling the practiced smile he wore for clients. It was something quieter. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. We walked together, not to my room this time, but to a small lounge near the back of the hotel. A piano sat silent in the corner. A lamp threw a soft pool of light over 2 chairs. We sat. I owe you, he said. More than you know, not for the slides or the pitch. For reminding me that I can show up as myself and still be enough. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything. You just needed someone to witness the person underneath the suit for a while. That's all. He looked at me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. Most people in my life only want the role, the boss, the leader, the one who doesn't falter. Last night you didn't ask me to be anyone. You just let me be. His voice caught a little. I felt my own eyes sting. We were 2 people on parallel tracks, different in age, in story, in responsibility. But in that moment, the same. Human, tired, hoping to be understood. We talked then, not about work, not about loss, but about the pieces of ourselves we rarely name aloud. He told me how he missed cooking on Sundays, how his wife used to hum while chopping onions. I told him how I sometimes stand in my backyard barefoot at night, just to feel the grass remind me that I belong on this earth. We laughed softly at how ordinary and strange people are. When it grew late, he leaned back, exhaling deeply. Deborah, whatever happens in our work, I will remember this. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. I nodded. That's all we ever get, really.